What happens when decades of simmering tensions finally explode on live television? You won't believe what unfolds when one of daytime TV's most controversial hosts pushes her co-panelists past their breaking point in a confrontation so intense that it left producers scrambling and audiences gasping. This isn't just another heated exchange. This is the moment that changed everything. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. When professional courtesy completely disintegrates on live television, the atmosphere in the View studio was electric with an undercurrent of tension that seasoned crew members hadn't felt in years. What started as a routine Tuesday morning show quickly transformed into a powder keg of personal attacks, political disagreements, and professional rivalries that had been festering behind the scenes for months. The topic that would ultimately ignite this inferno? A seemingly innocent discussion about media responsibility and fact-checking in today's political climate. As the cameras rolled and the signature opening theme faded, Joy Behar settled into her familiar spot at the panel table, her expression already carrying the sharp edge that regular viewers had come to recognize as a warning sign. The other panelists exchanged subtle glances, the kind of wordless communication that comes from working together through countless volatile moments. Sensing that today might be different, the conversation began innocuously enough, with Whoopi Goldberg steering the discussion toward recent controversies surrounding social media misinformation. But it was Joy's immediate interjection that set the tone for what would become an unforgettable confrontation. "You know what the real problem is?" she declared, her voice cutting through the standard opening pleasantries with surgical precision. "Everyone wants to play nice and pretend like we're not dealing with outright lies being spread by people who should know better." Sarah Haynes attempted to moderate the discussion, suggesting that nuanced conversations required careful consideration of multiple perspectives. Her diplomatic approach only seemed to fuel Joy's irritation. "Nuanced?" Joy scoffed, her trademark sarcasm dripping with contempt. "There's nothing nuanced about calling out dangerous rhetoric when you see it. Some of us have been doing this long enough to recognize patterns." The subtle dig wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Sunny Hostin shifted uncomfortably in her chair, while Alyssa Farah Griffin's jaw visibly tightened. The professional veneer that typically maintained civility during heated discussions was already beginning to crack, and they were barely 10 minutes into the show. What made this confrontation particularly explosive was Joy's decision to pivot the conversation toward her co-panelists' recent commentary on various political figures. "I find it fascinating," she continued, her tone growing more pointed with each word, "how some people at this very table can sit here and lecture about media responsibility while simultaneously giving platforms to the exact kind of divisive rhetoric they claim to oppose." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and the other panelists' body language immediately shifted. Shoulders straightened, eyes narrowed, and the friendly banter that usually characterized their interactions evaporated completely. Whoopi's attempts to redirect the conversation were met with Joy's relentless determination to press her point. "Are you seriously going to sit there and pretend like you haven't spent the last month making excuses for behavior that you would have condemned without hesitation just a few years ago?" Joy's voice was rising now, her legendary passion transforming into something more aggressive and personal than viewers were accustomed to seeing. Alyssa finally responded, her voice steady but clearly strained. "Joy, I think you're mischaracterizing my positions and my commentary. I've been consistent in my principles, even when it's been politically inconvenient." The measured response only seemed to infuriate Joy further. "Consistent?" Joy's laugh was sharp and bitter. "The only thing that's been consistent is your ability to move the goalposts whenever it suits your narrative. And frankly, I'm tired of pretending like intellectual dishonesty deserves the same respect as principled positions." The personal nature of the attack sent shockwaves through the studio. Crew members exchanged worried glances. Producers could be seen frantically communicating through their headsets, and the live studio audience fell into an uncomfortable silence that was palpable even through television screens. Sarah attempted once again to de-escalate, but Joy was beyond diplomatic intervention. "You want to talk about media responsibility? Let's talk about the responsibility we have to our viewers to call out hypocrisy when we see it, even when it's sitting right next to us." Sunny Hostin, usually reserved in her approach to internal conflicts, couldn't remain silent any longer. Joy, I think you need to take a step back and consider how you're coming across right now. We're colleagues, and this level of personal attack isn't productive for anyone. But Joy's response revealed just how deep her frustration ran. Colleagues, she repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. Real colleagues don't sit silently while they're supposed partners in this business. Legitimize dangerous rhetoric for the sake of appearing balanced. Real colleagues call each other out when they see them compromising their integrity. The accusation of compromised integrity was the point of no return. The other panelists' expressions hardened, and what had started as professional disagreement was rapidly evolving into something far more personal and potentially devastating. The tension in the studio was so thick that even the cameras seemed to capture the electricity in the air. Whoopi made one final attempt to restore order, but Joy was completely unleashed now, her decades of experience and strong opinions combining into a force that seemed determined to burn every bridge in sight. The confrontation that would ultimately end her tenure on the show was just beginning to reach its crescendo, and nobody, not the panelists, not the producers, not the viewers, was prepared for what would happen next, what transpired in. The following moments would shatter years of carefully maintained professional relationships and expose the raw animosity that had been building beneath the surface of America's most watched daytime talk show. The veneer of civilized discourse was about to be completely obliterated in ways that would leave everyone questioning whether some lines, once crossed, could ever be uncrossed. You know what, Joy? Alyssa's voice cut through the studio with a sharpness that surprised everyone, including herself. I've sat here for months listening to your condescending lectures about principles and integrity, and I'm done pretending like your self-righteous attitude gives you the moral high ground over everyone else at this table. The measured politician in her was rapidly giving way to someone who had clearly reached her breaking point. Joy's eyes widened slightly, not from surprise, but from what appeared to be genuine delight at finally provoking the reaction she had been pushing toward. Oh, now we're getting somewhere. Finally, some honesty instead of the rehearsed talking points we usually get from the Republican corner of the table. The dismissive reference to the Republican corner sent a visible shock wave through the panel. Even in their most heated discussions, the panelists had maintained certain boundaries of respect regarding each other's political affiliations. Joy had just obliterated one of those unspoken rules with casual cruelty. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Alyssa shot back, her voice rising with each word. You reduce every conversation to some cartoon version of political tribalism, because it's easier than actually engaging with the substance of what people are saying. You don't want dialogue, Joy. You want an echo chamber where everyone nods along with your pronouncements. The accuracy of the observation seemed to hit Joy in a way that her previous attacks hadn't. Her expression shifted from smug satisfaction to something approaching genuine anger. An echo chamber? I've been fighting for progressive values since before you even knew what politics was. Don't lecture me about substance when your entire career has been built on packaging conservative talking points in supposedly moderate language. Sunny attempted to interject, but Joy wasn't finished. And while we're being honest, let's talk about how convenient it is that you can sit here and play the victim when someone calls out your inconsistencies. That's exactly the kind of bad faith argumentation that's poisoning political discourse. The irony of Joy accusing someone else of bad faith argumentation while engaging in personal attacks wasn't lost on anyone watching. Sarah's expression had shifted from diplomatic concern to barely concealed frustration, and even Whoopi's legendary patience appeared to be wearing thin. Joy, I think you need to listen to yourself right now, Sarah interjected, her voice carrying an edge that regular viewers rarely heard. You're attacking Alyssa personally instead of engaging with her actual positions, and you're doing it in a way that's honestly painful to watch. The criticism from Sarah seemed to catch Joy off guard. Sarah was typically the most accommodating member of the panel, the one who tried to find common ground even in the most contentious discussions. Her direct confrontation was a clear signal that Joy had pushed the situation beyond acceptable boundaries. But rather than moderating her approach, Joy doubled down with a viciousness that shocked everyone in the studio. Painful to watch. You want to know what's painful to watch? It's sitting here day after day while people who should know better legitimize authoritarianism for the sake of appearing balanced. It's watching journalists abandon their responsibility to truth because they're more concerned with being liked than being right. The attack on Sarah's journalistic integrity was the nuclear option, and everyone knew it. Sarah's face flushed with anger and hurt, her professional composure finally cracking under the weight of such a personal and unfounded assault. "How dare you question my journalistic integrity?" Sarah's voice trembled with barely controlled fury. "I have never, not once, compromised my principles for popularity or convenience. And the fact that you would make that accusation shows exactly how far you've fallen from the professional standards you claim to uphold." The studio fell into a stunned silence. Even Joy seemed momentarily taken aback by the rawness of Sarah's response and the obvious pain her words had caused. But the moment of hesitation passed quickly, replaced by what appeared to be a determination to escalate the confrontation even further. Professional standards? Joy's laugh was harsh and bitter. Let's talk about professional standards. Let's talk about how professional it is to sit quietly while democracy is under attack because you don't want to appear partisan. Let's talk about how professional it is to both sides fascism because you're more concerned with maintaining access to power than standing up for what's right. The fascism accusation sent the tension in the room to a breaking point. Alyssa's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "Did you just accuse me of enabling fascism? Are you completely out of your mind?" "I'm calling it like I see it," Joy replied, her voice cold and calculated. "And what I see is someone who spent years working for an administration that attacked democratic institutions and now wants to rehabilitate her image by playing the reasonable conservative on a liberal talk show." The personal attack on Alyssa's professional history and motivations crossed every conceivable line. The other panelists stared in shock at the naked cruelty of the assessment, while Alyssa's hands visibly shook with rage. "You have absolutely no right to question my motivations or my integrity." Alyssa's voice was steady despite her obvious fury. "I've been consistent in my principles even when it cost me professionally and personally. And I won't sit here and let you attack my character based on your own prejudices and assumptions." But Joy wasn't backing down. If anything, the confrontation seemed to be energizing her in a way that was both fascinating and disturbing to witness. "Your principles? Your principles led you to work for people who tried to overturn an election. Your principles led you to defend policies that separated families and demonized immigrants. Don't talk to me about principles when your entire political career has been built on compromising them." The devastating personal attack left everyone in the studio speechless. The confrontation had moved far beyond professional disagreement or even heated political debate. This was character assassination being broadcast live to millions of viewers, and the fallout was about to become even more explosive than anyone could have anticipated. The silence that followed Joy's brutal assessment of Alyssa's career stretched for what felt like an eternity in television time. Producers could be seen frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, desperately trying to signal for a commercial break. But the confrontation had reached such an intense peak that even experienced television professionals seemed paralyzed by the raw emotion unfolding before them. It was Whoopi who finally broke the silence, her voice carrying a weight and authority that had been notably absent from her earlier attempts at mediation. "Joy, that was completely out of line, and you know it." The words were delivered with such quiet intensity that they seemed to echo through the studio despite being spoken barely above a whisper. But Joy was beyond the reach of even Whoopi's legendary ability to restore order. The adrenaline of the confrontation had clearly taken hold, and she seemed determined to burn down every relationship she had built over her years on the show. Out of line. What's out of line is pretending like we're having some kind of academic debate when we're dealing with people who have actively participated in attacks on our democracy. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Alyssa's response came with a fury that surprised everyone, including herself. "I am done with this. I am absolutely done with your sanctimonious lectures and your complete inability to engage with anyone who doesn't share your exact worldview. You want to talk about attacks on democracy? Let's talk about how you've turned this show into your personal platform for character assassination." The role reversal was stunning. Alyssa, typically measured and diplomatic even in heated moments, was now the one going on the offensive, while Joy seemed momentarily taken aback by the intensity of the pushback she was receiving from multiple directions. My personal platform? Joy's voice cracked slightly, betraying the first signs that her composure might be fracturing. I've been fighting for what's right longer than you've been in politics. I've earned the right to call out hypocrisy when I see it. You've earned nothing, Sarah interjected, her voice shaking with a combination of anger and hurt that was painful to witness. You've just destroyed years of professional relationships and trust because you can't stand the idea that people might have legitimate disagreements with your positions. The accusation of destroying relationships seemed to hit Joy harder than any of the previous confrontations. For the first time since the argument began, her expression showed something approaching uncertainty, as if she was beginning to realize the magnitude of what she had done. But instead of backing down or attempting to repair the damage, Joy made the decision that would define the end of her tenure on the show. You know what? If standing up for my principles means destroying relationships with people who have compromised theirs, then so be it. I'd rather be right and alone than wrong and popular. The declaration was met with a stunned silence that spoke volumes about how completely Joy had miscalculated the situation. Even Sunny, who had remained relatively quiet during the most intense exchanges, looked at Joy with a combination of sadness and disbelief. Joy, Whoopi tried one final time, her voice carrying decades of friendship and professional respect. You need to step back and think about what you're doing here. This isn't who you are. But Joy's response revealed just how far beyond reason she had traveled. This is exactly who I am. This is who I've always been. I'm someone who refuses to stay silent when I see injustice, even if it makes other people uncomfortable. And if that means I don't belong at this table anymore, then maybe it's time for me to find somewhere that appreciates someone who's willing to tell the truth. The threat to leave was clearly intended as leverage, a way to force the other panelists to back down and acknowledge that Joy's position was justified. But the response she received was not what she expected. Maybe you're right, Alyssa said, quietly, her voice steady despite the obvious emotion behind it. Maybe it is time for you to find somewhere else if you can't treat your colleagues with basic respect and professionalism. The support for Alyssa's position was immediate and decisive. Sarah nodded in agreement, while Sunny's expression made it clear that she, too, had reached the end of her patience with Joy's behavior. Even Whoopi, despite her obvious reluctance to see a longtime colleague and friend leave under such circumstances, couldn't bring herself to disagree with the assessment. Joy, you've crossed lines today that can't be uncrossed. You've attacked people's character, their integrity, and their motivations in ways that have nothing to do with legitimate political discourse. The realization that she had completely isolated herself seemed to hit Joy all at once. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, anger, hurt, and finally, a cold determination that suggested she had made her decision. Fine, she said, standing up from the table with a suddenness that startled everyone in the studio. If that's how you all feel, then I don't need to sit here and be lectured about respect and professionalism by people who think civility is more important than truth. The dramatic gesture of standing was clearly intended to be her moment of triumph, her principled exit from a situation where she was supposedly being persecuted for her beliefs. But the reality was far different from her perception. Joy, please. Sarah made one last attempt to salvage the situation, her natural inclination toward reconciliation overriding her anger. Sit down. Let's talk about this like adults. But Joy was beyond reach now. She removed her microphone with theatrical precision, the small gesture somehow carrying more weight than all the heated words that had preceded it. I've said everything I need to say. I hope you're all happy with your commitment to false balance and manufactured civility. The final insult was delivered with such venom that it seemed to poison the air in the studio. Without waiting for a response, Joy turned and walked away from the panel table, her heels clicking against the studio floor with a sound that seemed to echo with finality. The cameras continued rolling as the remaining panelists sat in stunned silence, processing what had just occurred. Whoopi eventually managed to regain enough composure to address the audience directly, her voice carrying a weight of sadness and professional responsibility. We're going to take a commercial break, she announced, her usual warmth replaced by a somber professionalism that reflected the gravity of what viewers had just witnessed. As the cameras cut away and the studio lights dimmed, the remaining panelists were left to contemplate the wreckage of relationships and professional dynamics that had been building for years. The confrontation that had started as a disagreement about media responsibility had ended with the dramatic exit of one of daytime television's most recognizable voices, leaving behind a fractured panel and an audience that had witnessed something unprecedented in the show's long history.